Welcome to Smart Talk. I'm Scott Lamar. Pennsylvania has more than 900 rape kits that have not been tested. That number is actually down from from the last 3 years. So how can a rape case go to trial or criminal proceedings continue without the important evidence a rape kit could provide if so many rape kits are not being tested? Often they can't. A new documentary film called I Am Evidence will be shown tomorrow night in Harrisburg. It describes the nationwide issue of rape kits that are not tested. To discuss today is Pennsylvania's Auditor General Eugene DePasquale. General DePasquale, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Scott. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Also, Kristen Hauser, Chief Public Affairs Officer with the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape and National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Ms. Hauser, welcome to the show as well.
Hi, Scott.
We have open lines right now. If you'd like to give us a call, ask a question about these untested rape kits, 1-800-729-7532. Send an email to smarttalk@witf.org. General DePasquale, as I mentioned, more than 900 untested rape kits, and as I said, actually, some progress has been made in the last 2 years in getting them tested. But for background purposes, how did we get to the point where so many rape kits are not being tested or weren't tested?
Well, it's a great question, and this is actually, as Kristen well knows, and people that are advocates know, this is actually a nationwide problem. It's not just Pennsylvania. The backlog really started from people just, I would say that there wasn't a high enough priority placed on getting all of these rape kits tested, which is the definition of outrageous. We've made progress over the last several years in Pennsylvania through the great work of the Coalition Against Rape. He's now a judge, but Brandon Newman, who's a state rep, was a state rep who was really the lead advocate in the legislature for bringing attention to this issue, plus our audit that highlighted a lot of these problems. We were, at several thousand untested rape kits. Only about 40% of police departments were even complying with the law. Today we're down to 900 with 90% compliance from police departments. But having said that, that's still 900 that haven't been tested, so there's a lot more work yet to be done. But it really was a lot of people not knowing, a lot of departments not complying with the law, and a lack of funding in many instances as well. And I do think that a lot of it was, in many instances, prosecutors pleading down for whatever reason.
Let me follow up on what you just said, that it wasn't a priority. Why don't you think it was a priority?
I don't want to play amateur psychologist for all the prosecutors and departments all over the state as to why it wasn't. All I just know is that when you're at 40% compliance with the law and testing every kit, and you had several thousand untested, and look, and I want to commend the crime labs of state police and also the Allegheny County lab and the Philadelphia crime lab. They were doing the best they can, but they just didn't have enough staff. The Allegheny County crime lab, for example, has the same number of people as they had in the early 80s before there was even DNA testing, so clearly there wasn't a priority place. This. Why? Look, I don't know that, and all I know is it wasn't.
Kristen, do you have an opinion on that?
Yes. And the film actually does a great job of pointing out there are a lot of different reasons why this ends up not being a priority. Certainly, money is one of them. We do sometimes still hear from folks that are saying, well, if I don't need this kit for my case moving forward, it pled out, the victim doesn't want to go through with prosecution anymore for whatever reason, people are saying, do I still have to pay to process it because they've got tight budgets? Well, yes, you may not need it in your county, but there could be somebody in another county that would be very helpful to. You want to get the DNA profiles into the CODIS system, which is a nationwide database of DNA from these cases. But we also saw what the film really highlighted was that a lot of times there is bias and judgment right off the bat when the initial report is given. So they go through and pull out pieces from police reports that say things like, victim wasn't dirty enough to support her claim of being raped outside, or don't take this case any further unless she contacts us again. So And we've seen that in other national studies that the DOJ has done when they've gone into audit police departments around the country. We found a significant bias in Baltimore. We've seen it in Detroit. We've seen it in some of the other cities that are having these big backlogs. So sometimes it's just, quite frankly, the old myths about what a rape looks like, what a victim's supposed to be like, whether or not you feel like taking it forward. those initial reactions can get in the way, in addition to funding and resources and all of the other things that are easier to talk about.
All right, well, let's talk about...
But, Scott, I want to add two things on to what Kristen said. One is she said in another county, and I'm just adding on to that, also about other states. So so when you get that up in the FBI database, the important thing is it's not just about other counties in Pennsylvania. It's other states can look at this data as well. If you're sick enough to commit a rape in Tioga County or Allegheny County, you're sick enough to do it in Utah if you're traveling across the country.
So the point you're making, and I think the film, by the way, as I mentioned, is I Am Evidence. We'll talk more about that and hear a little bit from the film in just a few minutes, that many people probably think of these kits being tied to individuals who have made the accusations. Mm-hmm. But as is pointed out in the film, and you both are making this point, is that this is evidence that is kept and could stop another rapist, a serial rapist. In fact, the film points out that one city, there were serial rapists that were stopped by these kits, many of them. So that's a big part of this. So
we need to keep in mind, by the time a person is perpetrating sexual assault as an adult, it is probably a pattern that develops sometime in adolescence. So serial rapists are not an anomaly. It's the norm. It's just a matter of how frequently and what your MO is. We also need to keep in mind many times, most of the time, somebody who's perpetrating a sexual assault is harming somebody that they already know, somebody who already trusts them. It's easy to get access to them. These kits are not necessarily like an unnamed rapist in a box all of the time. You will go to the hospital, you know the name of the person who did this to you, you know their address, you can identify them. It's not like an unidentified person, but it could be that it's unidentified for somebody else. So I may know John Smith, but somebody in Tennessee might only know him as Johnny B. They only know a street name, or they only know a nickname, or they know it's their cousin's friend from out of town that was visiting. So just because we may know the identity in one location, that same person could be still doing non-stranger assaults somewhere else, but not have full identity.
Mm-hmm. Let's get back to the cost issue. General DePasquale, these rape kits are expensive. What's it cost?
Well, it's about $1,800 per kit. So, yes, you can say that, and I'm not doing this because I know you're asking the question, $1,800 per kit. But when you talk about the absolute what you get back in return for that, to me, $3 million, it's now actually less than that, would clear out the whole backlog. So, yes, it is expensive in that sense, but think about what we're preventing with that cost.
Who pays that, actually?
Well, right now it is really department by department. I've been calling on the legislature. We could get rid of the whole backlog really in one budget season if they just allocated an additional $2 to $3 million. Now, long term, that's a one-time hit to get rid of the backlog. Long term, I do think we need to add space onto the state police lab. You have great people there doing great work, trying to get through this, but that lab hasn't been expanded in a long time, and that's one of the things that the state police has been asking for.
Okay, now, you were in the legislature, and you know how these things go, but I'm looking at this politically. Who would say, no, I don't want to spend $3 million to clean up or to get rid of this backlog?
Scott, I got a bullseye on my wall that I keep banging my head against because you're right. If you put this on a ballot, abortion, death penalty, whatever, like taxes, Marcellus Shale, we're going to have people all over the map. I have yet to find one voter that says, what I hope the legislature doesn't do is get rid of that backlog of untested rape kits.
Well, probably because very few people are talking about it. You two and a lot of other activists out there. But is it something that is front and center before the legislature?
Well, I don't know, and my guess is the answer to that would be no, because if it was, there's no way you're voting against this funding. I mean, it's just, first of all, it's the right thing to do. Secondly, it's political suicide. But having said that, there's no question, and your point is valid, because if it were front and center, it would have been done. That's one of the reasons why we're doing, like Kristen and I and other advocates are doing what we're doing, is to bring this out into the public light, because it is absolutely outrageous that this hasn't been done.
Are these kits actually sitting on a shelf somewhere?
We're getting better at that. When we first did our audit, yes, they were sitting on the shelves. Now that is that number is down dramatically for the ones that are simply sitting on police department shelves. So that number is decreasing. But yes, there are still some that are just sitting on police department shelves.
In a box.
In a box.
Yeah, in a box.
And just labeled on the side with magic marker or something like that.
And properly sealed with evidence. Yeah, the evidence seal. Yep.
Kristen, what actually goes into a rape kit?
So it is different state to state, but generally they are looking for any kind of DNA that would come from semen, from saliva, from blood. Some places are looking for debris from the crime scene. They're looking for hair follicles. So a rape kit it really depends on which state you're in, but it can include hair samples from the victim as well as anything then that's found off her body, so you know which is hers and what belongs to somebody else. Swabbing of the body anywhere that there was a bite mark, somebody kissed, bit, spit on someone, body cavities, including mouth, vagina, anus. So looking again for any kind of fluid from the perpetrator. So we're looking to collect DNA. The other thing that's in there are often the clothes that the victim was wearing at the time of the assault or that she put on immediately after the assault, because DNA can rub off or drain off onto those clothes. So you want to preserve those things.
We'll talk more about this in just a moment. You're listening to Smart Talk on WITF, your home for NPR News and all things regional. I'm Scott Lamar. Welcome back to Smart Talk. We're talking about the backlog of rape kits, untested rape kits here in Pennsylvania. We'll be talking about the film that will be shown in Harrisburg at the Forum tomorrow night on this topic called I Am Evidence in just a moment. Our guest today, Pennsylvania's Auditor General Eugene D. Pasquale, and Kristen Hauser, Chief Public Affairs Officer with the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape and the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. 1-800-729-7532 is our phone number. You can send a question or a comment to smarttalk@witf.org. Also, you could go on WITF's Facebook page. On Twitter, we are at Smart Talk WITF. Again, that phone number, 1-800-729-7532. Let's take a call from Diane in Gettysburg. Diane, you're on the air.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Yes, you're welcome.
I missed a good portion of this while I was talking to your call person. But I've recently spoken to a lab tech about this problem. And I said, is this, testing the rape kits, is this something that trained volunteers could do? And she said, absolutely. So I'm wondering if there is a way, thinking a little out of the box, but, the hospitals do these vast multiphasic blood screenings. And I'm wondering if there is a way, for instance, to create an event a day where, you have some trained volunteers to do some of this work. Obviously, there needs to be some supervision for managing chain of custody and so on. But I'm just wondering if there is, some way to do this without, to get caught up on the backlog.
All right. Thank you very much for your call. Okay, I'm going to say just off the top of my head that, Kristen, you know this very well, that defense attorney, that probably would be one of the very first things that they would attack if you don't have someone who has credentials and certified. But going to her point, could it be expanded to volunteers? Could it be expanded to those who may not be working in the lab?
I really don't know the answer to that question, but that was exactly what I thought too. When you bring in your forensic experts into a trial, which if you're using forensic evidence, that will be part of it, they want to talk to somebody about their experience, their credentials, their expertise in doing DNA analysis. So I think it's probably true that there's parts that could be done, but whether or not that could hold up in court, I would question. So I really don't fully know the answer to that
I've
question.
sat in on trials where a defense attorney spent 90 minutes on credentials for a witness. General, do you have any opinions on that?
I wouldn't want to dismiss it out of hand, but I would also want to work with prosecutors and law enforcement to make sure that before I'd say yes or no, that it's something that would actually be helpful. I do think the point is valid. It'd be great if we could have some more volunteers doing this, but if it would end up just getting the evidence thrown out, then despite the best of intentions, it would actually potentially be even more harmful.
Oh, I think the point is a real good one when you don't have enough people, obviously anything that is not 100% guaranteed, that the chain of the evidence and all that, you do have to be concerned with.
The other thing, too, is you've got to protect against cross-contamination. It needs to be done in a proper facility. And as we know here in Pennsylvania, our facilities aren't just short-staffed, but they are short on space. So I don't know if that would even work given our physical plant issue in Pennsylvania.
Are there occasions when someone is not charged because a kit hasn't been tested?
It's very difficult to know. I think a prosecutor could say that. I do know, though, that sometimes when cases are moving through the court system, the kit will have a rush put on it because you only have so much time to get to that preliminary
That was my next
hearing.
question, yeah.
Yeah, so I do know that they are sometimes prioritized based on the court calendar. But it's sort of interesting. We know what the problems are with the backlog because by that point, the kit has been registered and you can track it. What we still don't know very much about are, what happens at kits that aren't picked up, kits that are collected but not turned over to the lab. We don't have a tracking system in Pennsylvania right now to talk about all of that. And it's hard to know where errors are made or judgment calls are made that maybe somebody had it collected but then it wasn't processed.
All right, a tracking system. Do other states have tracking systems?
Yes.
That would seem to be kind of a no-brainer, that something this important, that there would be a tracking system. A FedEx package has a tracking system. A UPS package has a tracking system. A rape kit doesn't.
That's correct.
And I think
in terms of from start to finish. It has a tracking system once it's been turned over. But in terms of kits that are ordered by hospitals waiting to be used, like we don't have a single provider in Pennsylvania. Instead, we have minimum standards that kits need to meet, and then hospitals can order as long as they meet those standards from whatever company. So we don't have a single system.
General?
And I think along the lines of what Chris is saying is this is where it becomes is it a priority or not in Pennsylvania? Because if it's a priority, we're going to set up a tracking system. You're going to have an appropriate identification number, and law enforcement and prosecutors will be able to see exactly where it is in the system. And right now, that's just not the case.
We generally just talked about, whether there are cases that where people aren't charged because the kits haven't been tested. And Kristen brought this up, but this was my next question about there is a constitutional right to a speedy trial. Now, some people may look at our criminal justice system and see how long it takes for people to come to trial and wonder what that is. But there are actually limits on how long someone can be charged, not what brought the trial, how long the trial takes, all that sort of thing. Are there cases, or have there been potential cases that have not been brought to trial, or maybe they couldn't be brought to trial because these kits weren't tested?
What my understanding, and again, I don't want to speak for every single case because I just can't, but my general understanding of this, it's not that a case doesn't come to trial, but they may get somebody to plead to a lower offense. And so then they don't test the kit as a result of that. I do know that when the case is going to trial, those kits are now put on high priority to get them tested. But I do think there are instances where prosecutors may say, look, the victim isn't willing to testify, or some other circumstances changed where they then get the criminal or alleged criminal to plead to a lesser offense, and then that one doesn't get tested. And again, I think Kristen and I and many advocates would agree, and that is you still should do the test because then it gets it into the FBI database to, in case this person does it again.
Yeah, it's a lost opportunity.
Yeah, right. But having said that, I don't know of a case where it just didn't come to trial because of it. I do think there are instances where they've pled to a lesser offense.
And just to follow up, Kristen, and you can say what you want to do, but I wanted to follow up on what General DePasquale just said. Are there accusers who stop pursuing their cases while waiting for a rape kit to be tested?
Yes. One of the things, really, the court system takes a long time. Allegheny County has been trying something new, but it's the only county in Pennsylvania that's been doing it, which is to have a special sex offender court so that those cases move more quickly. And the reason they started doing that is when you are waiting a year to 2 years for your case to come to trial, your life is kind of on hold, and victims just want to get their life back. So, getting ready for a court date, having it postponed, having it rescheduled, it's very disruptive, and many times people just want to move on and walk away from it. So that does happen.
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, what were you going to say?
I wanted to point out, it's just so listeners are clear, a rape kit is not required for prosecution. It may be helpful in the prosecution, and it's definitely very helpful in stranger cases. But when it's a non-stranger assault, the kit may not solve that question of consent. So you can say positively, yes, it was this person, yes, sexual activity occurred, but that question of consent is still there. So if there aren't injuries or things that have been documented along with the collection of evidence, it's still up to the jury. And you absolutely can try cases. Not that you shouldn't. I just want people to understand that it's totally fine for cases to move forward without a kit. But if a kit has been collected, it should be tested and it should be included.
One of the reasons that we're having this conversation today is because the showing of the film I Am Evidence, and just wanted to play you a little trailer from that film.
They did a rape kit on me. I thought they're just gonna go out in a week and catch them.
And right now, my name is on a box, on a shelf, that has never been tested.
When you get that list of names and it just scrolls down and it doesn't stop, this is something where we can't rest.
You don't tell me what I can and can't do, and all it takes is focus, dedication, and commitment.
The system should be more accountable.
I am evidence that this is not just a kit, this is a person.
You know, that last statement is the one that I think is the most powerful there.
Yeah.
This is not just a kit. I am evidence. This is a person. Tell me about the film.
The film is a really well done documentary. They focus in particular on Cleveland and Detroit, which are two cities that had extremely significant rape kit backlogs just in that jurisdiction, and some prosecutors that decided to take it on to really make a big deal of it, get the resources. They put together task forces. There's a lot that goes into it because it's not just testing the kit and going to find the person. We can't forget about the person that is tied to that kit. So the film also shows that for victims, many times their lives are on hold. They're waiting for answers. They're, particularly if it's a stranger assailant, wondering if they're out there. Do they know who I am? Am I still in danger? It can be a huge factor. But also, sometimes people do move on. And then when you test that kit years later, it reopens those wounds. So we also want to be very clear. You need to be supporting victim advocacy organizations to help these people through. Because even if it's been 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, getting that kit tested and getting information reopens all of that stuff, and people end up feeling very raw and need help.
General DePasquale, when you did your audit, did you find that there were some kits not tested for 5 or 6 years?
We saw kits go back to the early 90s.
I was thinking, I'm sitting here thinking we're talking maybe 2 years tops.
No, I wish that were correct. Not that I want any kit not tested. We found some going back to the early 90s.
And so those kits stay on the shelves for 20 years. What happens to the case? I mean, you've described it.
Doesn't get prosecuted.
It doesn't get prosecuted.
I mean, that's part of the problem, too. Pennsylvania also does not have statutes defining how to properly handle and destroy kits and victim notification at that point in time. So some of those old kits were from cases where, for whatever reason, it didn't move forward, but they also didn't destroy it because we don't have guidelines, dictating that. So you had some places that held on to it, which is better than perhaps other places that said, well, that's pretty old, probably not going anywhere, and just destroyed it and nobody knew about it. So, I think we have to recognize at least some people were trying to do the right thing by not destroying the evidence, even if they didn't have a reason to test it.
I'm curious, are there other types of crimes where the evidence sits for so long?
Well, yeah. I mean, the lab's capacity to process any kind of forensic evidence is limited. And for instance, Philadelphia is using all of their federal dollars to get through the rape kit backlog and are probably going to end up resulting with a homicide DNA backlog, because the resources right now are going to getting rid of these kits. So forensic evidence is forensic evidence, and your ability to test it is what it is.
So why is the film I Am Evidence important?
Well, it's important for a few things. So the way I just answered your question, are there other crimes? Yes, other crimes do get backlogged. However, what is unique about sexual assault are all the things that we've been talking about now for the past 8 months or so with the Me Too movement, that sexual assault is not taken seriously. Victims often aren't believed, which means that their cases don't move forward, and that we judge individual victims based on a false set of assumptions about what sexual assault looks like. And when that happens, we end up giving perpetrators a pass, literally in these cases where victims have gone to get care, have evidence collected, and nobody does anything with it. So the film is really pointing out how those intersections of biases about rape victims, race, your socioeconomic class, all of those things play into whether or not these cases get prioritized.
So details on the film, when it's being shown, where?
Okay, so we are viewing the film tomorrow evening at the Forum in Harrisburg. It's free of charge. The film will begin at 6. We are going to follow with a panel discussion where we'll have some prosecutors, somebody from the Auditor General's office, somebody from the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, talking about these things and bringing up some of the points that this film pulls out.
Kristen Hauser is Chief Public Affairs Officer with the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape and National Sexual Violence Resource Center, Pennsylvania's Auditor General Eugene D. Pasquale. Thank you both for being with us today.
Thanks, Scott, for continuing to help us highlight this issue.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're listening to Smart Talk on WITF, your home for NPR News and all things regional. I'm Scott Lamar. Welcome back to Smart Talk. Only a week away from Pennsylvania's primary election tomorrow, we continue our conversations with the candidates today with George Scott, a Democrat running for the U.S. House of Representatives in the 10th Congressional District. The 10th District includes Dauphin County, the northern half of York County, and eastern Cumberland County. Mr. Scott, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a fan of the program.
Well, thank you very much. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm someone with deep roots here in South Central Pennsylvania. I grew up on a farm and down in Adams County. Went to public high schools and graduated and went on to college down in Washington, D.C. at Georgetown University, and then served for 20 years as an officer in the United States Army. My father had served for 30 years, and so I kind of followed a little bit in his footsteps. And then after completing those 20 years of service, spent a little bit of time living and working in Northern Virginia, but then in 2009 returned home and began serving in a new kind of way in ministry. And I'm an ordained Lutheran pastor. I live in Dillsburg in Northern York County, and I have a wonderful congregation there who has granted me the opportunity to take a leave so I can run for office. And I'm married and have 2 children and several pets.
So what do you see as the most significant issues facing the country and your priorities?
Well, I think the most significant issues are improving the lives of people in a tangible way on a day-to-day basis. And so that applies not just to the country, but here specifically to this district. And so how does that translate? I think that translates with 3 key fundamental issues. And these are issues that I've heard about over and over again from voters. And those would be health care and jobs and education. And so for healthcare, we have got a nation where we spend more per person on healthcare than any other nation in the world, and yet our outcomes are nowhere near the best. And that's not because we don't have high-quality people working in the medical field. It's because our system is not set up to deliver affordable and accessible healthcare on a consistent basis. And so that's one of the first things we need to do. People are really struggling with their healthcare. There's a lot of fear and anxiety, and I've experienced that in talks with people in ministry, and we have to tackle that issue head on. So we have to improve healthcare and make sure everyone has that. Second is in terms of jobs. People are, in many cases, working harder than ever, and yet they're struggling to get by. I meet people regularly who are working full-time, and at the end of the month are unsure if they're going to be able to pay their bills. They're figuring out, do I pay my utility bill this month, or do I try and put that off and take a little penalty there? If you're working full-time, no one should have to face that situation. We've got to create jobs, not only just in terms of quantity of jobs, but jobs that pay decent living wages so that people can have the kind of quality of life that they deserve. Our people deserve better than struggling to get by, scraping to get by month after month. So my commitment there will be to work to create jobs that pay living wages and programs that will provide skilled workers to fill those jobs. And then third is education. What I hear and what I see is that, first of all, many of our parents and grandparents are concerned about whether or not their children are getting the education they need in the school system, in the public school system. And I see teachers and administrators who are increasingly demoralized because they're overburdened. They're being asked to do more and more with less and less. So we're setting the system up for failure. Strong public schools is foundational, not just to our economy, but to our democracy. And that's one of the issues I would like to see us make the most progress on.
I want to talk about the specifics of what you're proposing and what you support with those three issues and others, but have to talk about something that's gotten a lot of attention with your candidacy, and that's the television commercial that you're running right now. As I mentioned, it's got a lot of attention, even nationally, where you disassemble an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle, throw its parts in a fire. What was your message?
The message there is that it's time for the conversation and for action on reasonable, common sense gun measures. So I support the Second Amendment. I'm not looking to overturn the right of people to own weapons for sporting purposes, for hunting, for defending themselves in their homes. But we have gone too far in terms of culture that we've created, and we have a problem with gun violence is what we've got, and all of us know this and see this. All of us are upset by this, and we see essentially massacre after massacre happening, particularly in our school systems, and yet we seem unable to take action. So what we wanted to do was say, it's time to stand up on this. It's time to take action, and that would mean common sense gun measures, things like universal background checks, which a vast majority of Americans, including here in Pennsylvania, are in support of, as well as ensuring that weapons that are intended for use on the battlefield are not present on our streets and in our communities.
But the semi-automatic rifle, an AR-15 is a semi-automatic, as you well know.
That's correct.
And from what I understand, you would like to see tighter measures on assault-style semi-automatic weapons. What are tighter restrictions?
Right. So there's a couple things that we need to do in terms of that type of weapon. First is not related to the weapon itself, but to the accessories. We need to ban these bump stocks that can convert the semi-automatic to an automatic. We need to eliminate high-capacity magazines, 30 or more rounds. Someone doesn't need that when they're using a weapon for hunting purposes. As far as the military-style assault weapons themselves, what I would like to see is that those are not routinely sold or used in our society. I recognize that there may be people, perhaps police officers, perhaps someone who's involved in a profession where they need to be proficient on that type of weapon. Fine, let's make those the exceptions. But weapons that are primarily intended for war, which the AR-15 is nothing more than a civilian counterpart of the M16, those types of weapons should not be routinely sold, should not be present on our streets and in our communities.
One of your opponents in the primary, Alan Howe, wrote an op-ed saying that commercial may work in a primary where it's just Democrats voting, but in a general election, the many gun owners in the district will see you as anti-gun, and it fits the narrative that the goal is to take away all guns or repeal the Second Amendment. You just said that's not what you support, but to his point that you have two cities, Harrisburg and York, in this district, but there's a lot of rural areas as well, a lot of gun owners in that district.
Right, and I'm not opposed to gun owners. I'm not opposed to the Second Amendment. I think Mr. Howe's comments are reflective of what we see in our politics today, which is that too many leaders are afraid to take this issue on head on, and they don't want to take the heat that comes with that. I'm willing to take the heat that comes with that, and I'm willing to enter in a conversation with gun owners. The Second Amendment is a right to bear arms, right? That's what it is. But yet if you talk to anyone and you say, so is that right unlimited? In other words, should your neighbor be able to have a tank sitting in his driveway? Of course they're going to say no. So everyone understands that there needs to be some type of limitations in terms of the right to bear arms. The question is, what are the things we can do that are common sense that the majority of people can agree on? I think it's not that there's a lack of solutions available on this issues. I think there's a lack of political courage and a lack of leadership, and I'm willing to step out and take some heat on this issue, but do it in a way that enters into a conversation, including with people right here in this district who are gun owners, to say, fine, you own a gun, that's great. I'm not opposed to that. But they don't want their children or grandchildren or friends or neighbors being gunned down in the streets, at a concert, at a movie theater, in their church. None of us want that. So how do we move towards creating a safer environment for all of our communities?
If you're just tuning in, our guest during this portion of the program as we continue our conversations with candidates, George Scott, a Democrat running for the U.S. House of Representatives in the 10th Congressional District. The 10th District includes Dauphin County, the northern half of York County, and eastern Cumberland County. I want to move on to some of those issues that you had mentioned earlier. Healthcare. Almost every Democrat that I've talked to who is running for office this year supports a single-payer Medicare for all type system. Now, from what I understand, you don't go quite that far, but you say we should be going toward that. Explain that.
So we're all shaped by our background and our experiences, and I spent many years in the military as a planner. And what you understand is that there are things that are feasible that you can do now and things that you want to do in the long run. So in the long run, I think the end state is to move towards something that looks like a single-payer plan. We're the only industrialized democracy that doesn't have that kind of plan. But getting there overnight is not feasible, I don't think, in our current political system. There's still a lack of understanding. There's still too much opposition to this. And so what we need to do is we need to first and foremost stabilize the current system of care that we have. And so the Affordable Care Act has been weakened by the elimination of the individual mandate, by the removal of certain cost subsidies. We need to make sure that we stabilize that plan so that people that are losing health care right now can retain their health care. And then we need to start moving towards single payer, but do it in a way that is reasonable and measured where we can review the results. So, for example, one proposal that I would have would be, let's create a buy-in option for Medicare. The majority of people who are on Medicare that I talk to are quite happy with that care. So let's say that we create a buy-in option, says that maybe we start with the age of 50. If you're 50 or older, you can buy into Medicare. There would be some upfront cost to the individual taxpayer for them to do that. But then after that, you can use the Medicare system and then let that system compete in the marketplace against private systems. And if folks like it and they vote with their purses and their wallets to go for that, then why would we not want to see that as an option that can grow and expand in our nation?
How would that save money?
Well, what it would save money is for your current individual, and the credit goes actually to Senator Bernie Sanders for this. He had a debate with Ted Cruz on CNN a number of months ago where they talked about this. And Senator Cruz criticized Senator Sanders because he said there would be increases in taxes to pay for this. Senator Sanders' point was, look, currently a typical family of four to get a decent health insurance plan is going to pay somewhere between $15,000 to $20,000 a year of premiums, and on top of that, they have deductibles and they have copays. He said to get to this type of plan in the long term, again, Medicare for all is what he's talking about, would require a tax increase, but that tax increase for a typical family of four would be $8,000 to $10,000. He said so the net is a savings overall to the family. The problem is that in our political culture, that's not a conversation that folks are ready to have. No one is going to support a tax increase of that size. So we have to, I think, create an appetite for Medicare that will grow gradually and then get the majority of the public behind that in order for this to be a feasible option.
You mentioned jobs in the economy and living wages before. Minimum wage is another area in which most of the Democrats that I've heard, over the past 3 weeks talking about this issue, support a minimum wage hike to $15 an hour. You don't right now.
I support the Raise the Wage Act. And what the Raise the Wage Act says is that we need to move the minimum wage higher, but we need to do it over time and in a controlled manner. And I think that's the right solution, because if we raise the minimum wage too far, too quickly, the ones that will be most severely affected are small business owners. And small businesses, if they've got 4 employees and 2 of them are minimum wage and we double the minimum wage overnight, now suddenly they've got a choice. Do I drop an employee or do I change my business and go out of business? So we've got to be very conscious of that. So the Raise the Wage Act basically says it does an immediate raise to $9.25 for the minimum wage, and then gradually through 2024 it raises it up to $15 an hour, and then indexes it to inflation from that point on, so that we aren't caught in this situation again 20, 30 years down the road.
What you just described, though, with small businesses has always been the argument against raising the minimum wage, period. So when you talk to people on the campaign trail, I'm sure you've talked to small businesses. What do they say about that?
Well, I think what most small business owners is they want the ability to be able to plan. Business owners, whether small or large, want to be able to understand what are the costs that I can anticipate that are going to increase in out years. Right now, one of the things they know that it's going to increase is healthcare costs. And so they're constantly struggling because that's a bit unpredictable. I think if they can say, okay, I know next year I'm going to have to give a $2 an hour increase to my minimum wage employees, how am I going to do that? Am I going to have increased revenue, or do I going to need to cut costs in another area? That's really what they want. I mean, my wife's a small business owner. There's many other small business owners that I know personally. They're not opposed to raising the minimum wage. They recognize that it helps those in our economy that are really struggling to get by. Particularly helps women. Over half of people who are on minimum wage jobs are women, and it gives them greater purchasing power. And the other thing it does is almost every single dollar that goes in a wage increase for someone who's making minimum wage is spent back into the economy. There's something that economists call the marginal propensity to consume. And what that means is that a dollar that gets put into the pocket of someone who's at the very bottom end of the economic spectrum is almost 100% put back in the economy, as opposed to dollars that are put into the pockets of folks who are in the top 1%, which rarely go back into the economy.
Are you concerned about those who are getting entry-level jobs, though? Because, that's one of the arguments we've heard about raising the minimum wage is that those who would be hurt would be those 18, 19, 20 years old, just starting their careers, their working careers, and that those jobs would not be available to them.
I'm certainly concerned about the ability of folks to enter the job market. But there is always going to be a need for entry-level workers in industries. Granted, some industries we've seen a move away from entry-level workers with automation. That's already going on. But by and large, businesses are still going to need people to perform the basic tasks of their function, whatever that might be, whatever sector of the economy. So I think they're going to continue to hire.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's move on to education. You mentioned this is one of the issues that you hear most often from the voters out there. So what do you support? What do you oppose as far as a member of Congress with education?
So what I would like to see is our administration stop trying to tear down the public school system. So the current Secretary of Education, Secretary DeVos, is far more interested in transferring money away from public schools and into private school system through vouchers and other types of means, instead of strengthening our public schools. This public school system has historically been the foundation of our democracy. It creates not only good workers, but it creates informed citizens, citizens that can understand the issues that we're facing as a nation. And so I want to see, first of all, leadership within the federal government from the administration that supports strong public schools. And part of the role, I think, of Congress is to provide oversight of that process, so that if the Department of Education is not supporting public schools, Congress steps in through hearings, inquiries, and other means to try and get them back on track.
What do you mean by support? Money?
Well, I think part of it, what we want to do, so currently right now the federal government spends roughly 7 to 8% of the funds that are spent on education, on public education, come from the federal government. So the majority comes from the state and the local level. And most of the federal funds are for programs like Head Start and other programs which are not directly involved with the K through 12 educational spectrum. And so I would be supportive of seeing the federal government increase its share of spending on the education that our children receive. I think boosting it from 7 or 8% to 9 to 10% would be appropriate. But let's put those funds towards improving the conditions within our schools. So right now, you often talk to teachers, and they're buying supplies for their classrooms, paying out of pocket. It's ridiculous that our teachers should have to do that. They are underpaid and overworked as a whole. We need to make sure that if they need supplies, let's provide them with the funds so that they can get the supplies they need for the classroom. And I would also be supportive of increased wages for teachers. Public school teachers are true servants of the community. And I would say that, as a veteran, I think that teachers need to be thanked for their service every bit as much as veterans do, because what they do is every bit as important.
The issues you brought up are what we've heard here in the last month or so. Teachers in West Virginia, Kentucky, Arizona, and you hear often about the teachers that are spending money out of their own pockets on supplies, so they're looking to the state for more money, but in that case, looking to the state for more money. You mentioned that you would oppose anything for private schools, tuition vouchers, that kind of thing. Looking down through the list, I'm just curious, does that include charter schools?
Well, so there are some charter schools that should be eligible for public funds. So, for example,
because they are considered public schools.
Because they're considered public. So,
right.
So there's some here for example, in York, the Lincoln Academy and others, and I'm fine with that. But ones that are strictly private, I think if folks want to support those with their own dollars out of their pockets, that's fine. Everyone should have that opportunity if they want to do it. But it's not the role of the federal government or the state government, I think, to fund private schools. Public education is the foundation of our educational system. We need to support it. It's essential for our democracy.
Of course, one of the reasons that we're even having this conversation is that those who would support more choice, that they don't want parents don't want their kids going to schools that may be underperforming, and they want that choice to where to send their child. Shouldn't they have that choice?
I think they should have that choice of where to send their child. I think this is an issue that the state has got to take on, state and local communities. It's not really a federal issue, but there are clearly problems with the distribution of funds to support public schools at state and local level. And my hope is that we will get folks elected here in the 2018 election cycle that will tackle that head on.
We hear often about Social Security. Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, this is an issue that has been tied to him, the Speaker of the House who is leaving, that we must do something with Social Security and Medicare, that we will run out of funding for those programs by, I think the last year I heard was like 2029, something like that. You actually support expanding Social Security. In what way?
Well, I think what we should do to strengthen this and stabilize the Social Security system is lift the cap that is placed on Social Security taxes. So, as you probably know, and I think it's $128,000 income for individuals and $256,000 for a couple. Any wages beyond that is not taxed for Social Security purposes. There's no reason for that cap to exist. We need to remove that cap, and if we did, an income beyond that was taxed for Social Security, that would lengthen and stabilize the Social Security system, most experts say, for at least 30 to 40 years. So it eliminates the potential crisis that is looming for the Social Security system. But what we also see in Social Security is that it was originally designed to help folks who are older to be able to live, to have the means to live. And what we see is more and more senior citizens who are living well below the federal poverty level with their current Social Security benefits. So for folks that are living below the federal poverty level, I would like to see their benefits raised to get them closer to having some type of reasonable income to live off of.
So from what I understand, you're looking at like $16,000 or less?
Correct. It's not a huge amount of money, particularly when you consider the amount of money that we're giving in tax breaks to the top 1% of our nation.
I hate to bring this up in just 30 seconds or so, but just yesterday you received an endorsement from Kate Michelman, the former president of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, on the issue of abortion. In 30 seconds or less, if you could talk about that issue and what you support.
Well, I support women's rights strongly, and that's not simply in the issue of choice, but also across the board. I want women to be free and from sexual assault and sexual harassment. I want them to have equal pay and equal rights in the workplace and in our society, and I want them to have access to health care that will give them, to include family planning services that will never put any woman in the situation where she's faced with that difficult choice.
Again, we have about 45 seconds left. I want to thank you very much for being with us today. Why are you the best candidate in this? There's 4 candidates running in the Democratic primary.
Right. So all the candidates are good people. But what we need to focus on, who are Democrats, is which candidate is best positioned to defeat Scott Perry in November and go down to Washington, D.C. and represent the people of this district. And I feel that I'm that person. I feel that my military service record matches up well with his. My current calling as a minister speaks well to people in this district, and I've got deep roots and deep ties. I understand the people here. I have deep compassion for them, and I will represent them represent their interests in Congress, and ensure that their voices are heard, ensure that Central Pennsylvania values are brought to Washington, D.C. rather than the other way around.
George Scott is a Democrat running for the House of Representatives in the 10th Congressional District. The 10th District includes Dauphin County, the northern half of York County, and eastern Cumberland County. Mr. Scott, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Scott. It was my pleasure.
Coming up on tomorrow's program, we speak with another candidate in another district. We're only a week away from the primary, so we only have a handful of candidates to go. We'll talk to you tomorrow.